Hi, I'm Bruce Lorincz, and this show is called Bruce on the Loose. I talk to people in the school system, city government, businesses, and now I'm on site at Woodlawn Cemetery with Roger Havens. Roger, thanks.
Well,
good to
hello.
see you.
Well, good seeing you. Thank you for coming out today.
And you're really noted as one of the historians in town. Are we at a historic headstone here?
Yeah, this is Woodlawn Cemetery. This was the first burial here, and this is of the infant daughter of Chloe and Frederick Brown. So Chloe and Frederick Brown were some of the first pioneers, not the first pioneers, to come to Wadsworth, and they built a log cabin located about where the Wadsworth Public Library is today. And their infant was one of the first deaths in Wadsworth, and the cemetery didn't exist. Now, there were two other cemeteries that were in the area. The Western Star Cemetery and the High Church out on Eastern Road had a cemetery. But I think the Browns wanted their children, or child in this case, to be buried here. And so fortunately for Frederick Brown, who owned the property probably to about Beck Street, his brother owned this land, and his brother was Owen Brown, who lived up in Hudson. Owen never lived here. You may not recognize his name, but you will recognize his son's name, and that was John Brown, the abolitionist. So it was suspect that obviously them being related, his uncle living here, that John Brown frequently came to visit his uncle here in Wadsworth. But anyway, getting back to it, so they had this death, and Owen Brown said, you know what, I will so-called donate an acre of land that he owned located here, and it could be used for burying people. However, he was going to maintain the pastoral rights to it, so if somebody fenced it in and they put goats or sheep or whatever in it, that would be allowable. And so that's how it started out. And you have to remember, if you look at some of these trees in the area, they're huge. And I suspect some of them are trees that didn't get cut down at the time, but this whole property would have been filled with that type of ancient tree. So it was very unfinished. They found this, or at least started this plot here, and so the infant Brown was buried here. Now later on, I think about a year later, they had twins. The couple had twins. They both died, and so they're buried in the same area. And this monument used to stand this tall, and it listed at the bottom that the twins, they didn't have names because evidently they were stillbirth. So, but over the years, something happened to this tombstone, and half of it is missing, but at least it has the infant daughter's name. And this was laying on its back for years and years, probably the last 30 years, and we finally resurrected it. We did have to look for the slotted base to it, so we dug down, and it was that deep under the ground, which meant it sunk that much over the years. And that's what we're finding here, is that a lot of these bases, because of the weight and the years, 175, 200 years, they eventually push down into the ground, and we have to find them.
That brings me, we talked to Deb Holcomb before, and she talked about the cleaning of headstones. Now, the restoration is a lot longer process, isn't it?
Yes, it takes, we can restore maybe 2 each time we come out, and that's always a challenge. It just depends. We'll be working along there, things are going smoothly, and we run into something under the ground that says, whoa, where'd this come from? And then we probe a little bit more, trying to find, like I say, in this particular case, it was the base that was so far down in the ground, and that took a lot of effort to dig around it. And when you pull these stones out, they are not light whatsoever. They're at least minimally 50 pounds, and they could be up to 100 pounds. So we roll them out, we clean them up, And she probably told you that process.
Yeah, a little bit, but you probably need quite a few resources to go ahead, because like you say, you never know what you're going to get into.
Yeah, and I don't know if she talked about the one restoration we had up there and I was digging that one out, and I said, oh my gosh, it looks like there's a tombstone under the ground here. And sure enough it was, and it was stuck down in the ground. We pulled it out, and it was, besides it being broken about halfway down, it was in perfect shape because it never got weathered. It was down, protected under the ground. And I read the name, and I kind of laughed, and I said, oh, they must made a mistake. And when they made a mistake, you know, when it is carved in stone, you can't erase it. So a lot of times what they would do is take the scraps, or they would break the tombstone in half or maybe into pieces, and they would send it down here as fill. Well, in this particular case, it said He-Man, H-E-M-A-N, and his last name was Hanchett. And I thought, oh gosh, the guy's name was Herman. They left the R out, and so they used his fill. But it bothered some of us, and some people got on to find a grave and found out he, in fact, is buried down in the River Styx Cemetery. So that added a little bit more confusion. But what we're finding is people moved bodies of their loved ones from cemetery to cemetery. I think wherever the family, you know, starts expanding, and in his case, it was in River Styx. And he was the only one who had died in his family at that time. So he may have been buried here for a while, and then when his wife or maybe other family members died, they decided, you know, we're going to put him down at River Styx. So they would have interred him and moved him down there, and he has a monument down there. So in that case, and we have another case like that just next to us, the Loomis family, there at the Wadsworth Historical Museum, we have the top of a stone that says Julia Loomis. Well, I knew she was buried in this cemetery, and I kept thinking, why is her headstone there at the museum? So again, some deductive reasoning here is that, number one, the monument company was that navy blue brick building directly across from the museum. I think there's a dog groomer's place in it. So that was the monument company at the time. And so they may have come down here and removed that headstone because her husband remarried, and so they eventually they put in a headstone there that says the Loomis family, the Sherman Loomis family, and she has a brand new granite stone. So that one was just a used one, and because he was replacing it, it probably went back up to the factory, or not the factory, but where they carved them, chiseled them. And again, they just kind of rendered it to their own little scrap yard. And sometimes they'd just give it to the cemetery, and they would bust them apart with a hammer to use as backfill when putting in other graves.
Roger, you mentioned the Historical Society.
Yes.
How much interaction do you have with that group?
I have a lot because I'm the president of the Wadsworth Area Historical Society.
Congratulations.
Yeah. But so that's where I can get a lot of my research too. Is, you know, I have access to those records. Find a grave is excellent to a large extent. And then we have people in the group that are more the researchers. I'm not into the family trees and all that sort of thing.
Genealogy?
Genealogy.
Right.
Dr. Carino is excellent. I mean, he could tell you all the relatives of Chloe and Frederick and all that sort of thing. I know the basics, and I just know what I want to know. And again, this is the first one buried 1817. Remember, Wadsworth was founded in 1814. And so 3 years after they settled here, this death took place.
Roger, why don't we move? We have a monument closer to College Street. Why don't we move over there, and you can tell us about that?
Okay.
How about that? Back with Bruce on the Loose with Roger Havens. Roger, we're at a Curtis Monument here. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Okay, well, actually, it's a very tall monument, and you can see it depicts what it appears as a woman with a flowing robe, And in her right hand, it appears that she's holding a ship's anchor. So I always wondered as a kid what significance this particular monument had. You know, is there a woman that was drowned on a ship or something like that, and that's why she's up there? And so then as I researched into it, it was the William Pitt Curtis Monument, and their headstones are behind here on their individual plots. But actually, when he was a pharmacist or a chemist, I guess you would call it back then, down in Seville, and he eventually moved his business to Wadsworth. And coincidentally, his building, or where he worked out of, was is the Graham Kelly Insurance Company, just right of the old Strand Theater. And that building, by the way, is probably the oldest structure in downtown Wadsworth, original structure. It's all wood. All the other buildings in town were replaced with brick or block, and in that case, that one survived all these years of being wood. A lot of them caught on fire over their history, just like Medina's entire city burned down because they were all wooden buildings. But that one has survived. But anyway, so he had his store there, or his pharmacy, and when he first came to Wadsworth, he built a house directly across the street from here, and it was in a Western Reserve style, federal style, I guess you would call it. And eventually they replaced those houses because they either outgrew them, or when they were first built originally, you know, they weren't set up for electricity and plumbing and that type of thing. So he eventually built a house that's catty corner over there that's still standing and now has a storefront in the front. But so he and his wife and his only child, Willie, lived in that house. So that was back in the days where these were dirt roads, and the hill going into town, which was much steeper. I mean, when this became the highway as such through Wadsworth, they had to grade it down so the trucks could get up the hill. But anyway, he and his wife lived across the street, and so Dad would go off to work in the morning, and little Willie liked the fact that he could pull his wagon up the hill, and then on the way home he could jump on the wagon and come riding down in front to his front door, basically. So one fateful fall, he did that, and he came down the hill, and he got out of control with the wagon he was on, and unfortunately somebody had left the gate to the cemetery open down here in the corner right next to the road, and he crashed into the gate, and the latch went into his stomach, and long story short, he passed away. So his parents were so grieved, the mother said, you know what, we need to do something in his memory, and so she had this monument erected. You'd have to figure out the symbolism, you know, does that represent her and the anchor she had to carry the rest of her life, knowing their only son passed away? I don't know that. But anyway, she wanted to be able to stand there at her front window across the street and look out and see the monument. And also William Pitt became very active with the condition of the cemetery because it was very neglected during its beginning years, and people were in protest about it, so they finally put together a cemetery board to make sure the appropriate work was getting done to keep it nice, and as you can see today, it's in great shape. But that's the story behind the monument, and Willie's on the other side, or at least his little capstone.
Roger, now we're certainly blessed to have modern medicine. We can go to Cleveland Clinic, we can go to Summa,
Yep.
we can go to University Hospital. Not so. Life expectancy was quite low during the 19th century, wasn't it?
Yes, it was quite low because of those type of accidents. This was before penicillin, which came out in the early 1900s. And ironically, his dad was a pharmacist. He dealt in all the drugs known to man at that time, which were very few. A lot of them were just herbs and spices and roots and berries and that type of concoction put together. Some of it was effective, but for the most part, it didn't heal anyone as such.
Roger, why don't we talked to Deb briefly about some war veterans, but I think you can tell us about two war veterans who were brothers in the War of 1812 and also the Mexican War. We'll be back in just a second. We're back with Roger Havens. Roger, could you help us with some veterans here? I think we have a lot of history here with Mr. Miller.
Yes, I wanted to point him out because Jacob Miller was the builder of the house that was recently torn down for the new CIS. Everybody called it the cement house. And
I think more people know it maybe the Schaefer House.
And they could call it the Schaefer House. It was also the Falk House in some people's minds. It was also the Harder House. So it was all the same family. It just took over names as people passed away. So Jacob would have been the actual builder of that house. And as you saw it before it went down, you noticed it was covered with a stucco cement. He made all the bricks by hand that went into that house. There was a clay pit back, it'd be now on the high school grounds, and he dug the clay and they were put into forms and sun-baked, similar to a process you could see over at Hale Farm during the summer. They will show how people made brick. So had to make thousands and thousands of brick. Now right around the era of World War II, those bricks started to deteriorate. Now granted, this house was built in 1838, 1839. So over the years it started eroding. So that's when they brought people in to put that cement facade on it to save the brick. So that's Jacob Miller.
I imagine this was restored, right?
Yes,
this really looks wonderful.
He was very black, not him, but
right.
The tombstone was very black, as well as his wife over here, Sarah. And so this is one that was cleaned. In fact, I believe I cleaned it. And the reason I kind of focused in on all the past veterans, he was a veteran of the War of 1812. And just as an FYI, there's 14 people in this old grounds that were veterans of the War of 1812. There were 16 that were veterans of the Civil War. There's 4 that are veterans of the Revolutionary War. So that comes up to what, right. 34? And number 35 is right next to him. This is Jacob Miller's brother, and he was in the Mexican War.
And that was in the mid-19th century, about the 1850s, I believe?
Yes.
Okay, wow.
So, anyway, so there's 35 veterans, and before we started doing the cleaning, we'd only identified around 26. So we found more after we cleaned the stone, saw the name. Some of them didn't have these markers, and in fact, we built these new flag holders and medallion holders and put them in the ground. They're just made of PVC pipe with cement in them, but they're doing the job. They're holding up the place. But that just goes to show how many veterans just in this 1 acre ground, 35 of them. Mm-hmm. And so we did a concerted effort. We're still looking for medallions because they're hard to get, hard to replace, let's put it that way. And so you'll see some of these with the flags are draping down because we don't have the actual medallion holder to put them in at this point. But we're working with the veterans group in town trying to gather them up.
Takes time. Rome wasn't built in a day, right? It takes time.
I don't
think
so, but you would know that. I wasn't around back then.
Can we go to another stop, Roger? We have another opportunity to get a little more history coming up.
All right.
Back with Roger Havens. And Roger, who do we have here?
Here we have the tombstone of Sylvia Beach. And it says on there, daughter of A and R Beach. That's Abel and Roxy Beach. And lost in the woods on April 17th, 1824, and was never found. So this is probably the most visited tombstone in this particular cemetery, especially with the kids, because they read about Sylvia Beach in a history book that they read about Wadsworth. and they want to know where Sylvia is, where Sylvia is. Well, even when we get here, I said, well, Sylvia's not here. This is nothing more than a marker, because she's not buried here, because obviously she was lost in the woods and she was never found. And that goes back to the family, the Beach family that came to Wadsworth, actually in 1823. And their farm was out where the Hayne farm is today, out on Akron Road. If you're familiar with that, as you leave town, you go down the hill. And on the north side was the Hayne farm. That was the Beach's farm at that point. And so their daughter, who was 22, 23 years old, when she was a little child, she got scarlet fever. And it damaged her physically in the fact that she couldn't speak and she couldn't hear. And then at times she would have kind of convulsions and things like that as a reaction to her whole ordeal. So they had to keep an eye on her, because her way of having a fit as such is that she would take off running. And if they weren't watching her, she could take off, run, and they wouldn't be able to find her for a while. So they kept a close eye on her. Well, one day at the log cabin, Mom and Sylvia were carrying wood into the cabin, and Mom went into the cabin first to set her load down and hold the door open for Sylvia. And when Mom went back to the door and opened it up, Sylvia was gone. And that's the last that anybody saw of her. So, of course, she shouted out to the boys to come in, and the husband to come in to the cabin and help search for her, because they were back in the field or out at the barn or whatever. And, they thought right away she couldn't have gotten far, because they had just built their cabin, which meant all the tops of the trees were down, and they were stacked up all the way around the cabin, to be hauled off later and burned. And so they figured, it was kind of a natural fence. And so they searched and they started tearing through that debris and still couldn't find her. Well, eventually they found her footprints, because it was in March and there was a slight snow on the ground. And they found her prints going in a, I guess it would be a southwesterly direction. What I figured, it was through the valley towards Durling Park, basically, where that creek flows. And so they got the neighbors involved. Well, the closest neighbor was a half-mile down the road, and that was the Judge Isles. And in fact, he's buried just, right here. And so they got his family, his boys involved, and him, and they continued to search through the night. They finally gave up because it was dark, it was cold, and all they had back then were torches and maybe lanterns. And they said, you know what, let's meet back here first thing in the morning when it gets a little bit lighter, so we can follow these tracks even farther. So they did reconvene the next morning with more pioneer families coming in to help. And they tracked until the sun came up. And guess what happened to the snow?
It melted.
It melted.
Those tracks.
And it melted her last existence away. So they continued to search day after day after day. A week later, they convened as many pioneers as they could find from the neighboring communities to do a thorough search, because at that point they were looking for a body. They weren't looking for a live person. And so they got people from Norton Township, Copley Township, Sharon Township, Chippewa Township, all the way, Seville. And they brought hundreds of men and boys in, and they literally made a line of people that went from Holmesbrook Park all the way out to their farm, and they scavenged all the property. And they used horns for the line, so that when the first guy blew his horn at the beginning, everybody blew their horn. That meant move forward. And if they started that again, that means to stop, that she had been found. Well, they found absolutely no trace of her.
Still a mystery to this day.
Still a mystery to this day. We don't know. They never found any signs of torn clothing, any blood, anything that she possessed when she left that cabin.
That's quite a story, and she, of course, would not be able to let them know if she was in danger
Right,
because she couldn't
out.
speak.
Yeah, they couldn't call out to her, so everything had to be visual on the searchers. And to this day, and I don't know what you think happened to her. What do you think?
Well, you know, there's been some bear sightings lately in the Wadsworth area. I'm not sure if they're bear or wolves or something. I think maybe, but you'd think there still would be a trace if there were wolves or some kind of animal.
Bears were a problem in this area, you know, at the beginning, as well as wolves, coyotes, rattlesnakes, poisonous rattlesnakes. You know, they pretty much obviously got rid of all that. You know, big cats. And there were still Native Americans in the area. You know, that was, you know, the War of 1812 kind of ended a lot of it, but there were still some scattered about. She may have gotten snatched up by the Indians because they would have looked at her as a novelty type thing and maybe, you know, had some kind of spiritual means. So all sorts of theories could go through your head. There were also, you know, things like quicksand that was here. You know, Wadsworth back in the early 1800s looked nothing like what it does today. I mean, our creeks are filled in, have been culverted in. A lot of the hills have been, you know, lowered, and the crevices that used to run like through Durling Park, you know, kind of got rounded out a little bit. So, you know, all the terrain has changed. And again, you know, looking at the ancient trees like this sugar maple tree, you know, that has to be well over 100 years old, maybe 125 years old. And it may have just been a sapling, you know, growing up in this woods at the time. So, anyway, that's her. And this has been re-engraved, and I believe it was Midwest Monument Company that did that. If you go on the back side, you'll see the original graving, and I think the cemetery board, probably because, or the cemetery personnel probably got tired of trying to point out this tombstone, because with it badly eroded on the original side, it was hard to spot. Now they can say, oh, it's halfway down the sidewalk towards College Street, and it's been re-engraved so it can be easily read.
Roger, why don't we take the last segment and take a look at restoration up close and personal.
There you go.
Hi, we're back with Mark Watkins joining us here. And Mark, you're chief cook and bottle washer here with restoration. Looks like you got quite a project here.
Yes, we do. What we're doing this morning is we're pouring a slotted base. What happens is the tablets get broken off, and that tablet is right behind you. The break is below ground level. Now, normally we can epoxy these. We've got an epoxy that will glue them back together, but it doesn't work below ground. So when that happens, we have to pour a slotted base, and it's, you know, about the regular size you see here, and then we have to we have a little insert here that makes a mortise, and so we're gonna put in the quickcrete up to the top, and we have this insert right here, and then when we're all done, that tablet is going to fit right into that mortise. And we finish it off with a product that's historic lime mortar, which is special for the industry for monument repair, and we use that. You wouldn't want to use quickcrete or anything like that to attach it into the mortise because it's too hard.
That probably happens quite a bit. I mean, the breaking off with the years, yeah, and the marble, it probably happens more than you'd care to think, right?
I'm afraid there's some knuckleheads that think it's a cool thing to knock over headstones. And so a lot of these have been down for a number of years. And so that's what we're doing, is recovering history, putting them back up.
It really is quite a tradition that you're having the dignity of these people, and I'm sure it's something that the community really appreciates.
Oh, they do. We get a lot of feedback on that, and it's very satisfying to recover history.
No question about it. So we have some mortar being prepared for you. What will we do with that?
So we're not quite finished. We're going to take the mortar up to the top here.
Okay.
And we're going to take it up to the top of the insert. And then that insert will tend to float, and we don't want that to float because we need 2 inches down, 2 inches deep, and so we'll brace it down with some lumber to hold it down so it doesn't float up. The dimensions of the insert is about 1/4 inch bigger on each side than the tablet that's going in there, and it gives us enough room to put in our lime mortar.
Just as I say that, Nick rolls in with
There
the
it
mortar,
is.
right?
We've got mortar.
Nick, thanks for all your efforts. And have you been doing this for a while?
It's been since, 2020?
Yeah.
Spring 2020, I think.
That's fantastic. You could go right into the masonry program and be a journeyman, couldn't he, Mark? He could really do a great deal.
He is 13 years old and really good.
Wow, fantastic. Fantastic.
So what we do...
So now that's what you're doing. You're putting it on the sides there, Mark.
We're going to slide it right in here.
Okay. I think Mr. Kali is ready for you for the carpentry program.
I don't think I can build a house. I think they make jokes of my carpentry skills here. I'm
Well,
not that good.
I think Nick's ready to go.
Nick is a pro. Nope.
So I'd imagine once your process is done, Mark, this is lasts pretty. I mean, this is pretty solid, and it's not going to go anywhere, is it?
It's solid. It'll last. This is yes. We've got it. We've got it in a bed of gravel, Midwest number 57 gravel. It's 2 inches deep. It's padded down, tamped down real hard, and then when we lift out the molds, we'll coarse gravel and clay soil around it, and it's in there solid. It won't move. We need some more. Do we need to screw that down yet there, Nick, do you think?
No, it'll be good for now.
We need another one?
Oh, yeah.
So there's many steps to restoration. It just doesn't. You just don't find it, clean it, and put it in the ground. There's a lot of things to it.
A little bit. I don't know if it's been talked about, but we've been trained. We went through a training program. I don't know if we talked about that
You
yet?
can elaborate a little
Sure,
more on
yeah.
that. Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah, we had an organization called the Cemetery Conservators for United Standards. A guy by the name of Mark Morton came in and trained us on how to do this. We use products that have been approved by the Department of Veteran Affairs on national cemeteries. So, he showed us how to do slotted bases, how to do infills, and how to set headstones. So yeah, we've been thoroughly trained on this.
And I'm sure if people would watch this show and want to get involved, you would probably take them they would watch for a while.
Yeah.
They might do certain portion,
Yep.
and maybe Nick would help them
Yeah.
learn the ropes.
Yeah, we would train them. We'd love to get help. I can't do much. I'm getting too old. So we'd love some new blood, new bodies to help.
Yeah, maybe some people. We have a lot of people. I saw the last census when the mayor did the state of the city message. We're at last census 26,000 people. We've increased in population. Maybe there's someone that would be interested in doing this. You certainly would welcome them, wouldn't you?
We sure would. It's a lot of fun. If you like history, if you like history, this is a wonderful place, because that's what a cemetery is the history of the town. So.
then what will the next step be once Nick gets this all set to his satisfaction? What will we do next, Mark?
So for this here, we're going to brace down. We're going to brace down that insert so it doesn't float, and then let it cure. We'll come back in about a day or 2 days, and take off the forms. We've got a mold release on the forms, and that mold to help get it off the concrete. And that mold release is Crisco.
Okay.
We use shortening to grease the wood, and that kind of helps release it when we take it off. And we'll take it off probably in 2 days. It might rain tonight, so it'll be 2 days before we do it. Before we're done, and Roger and Nick are finishing it right now to get a nice finish on it.
And what's your feeling once you do all those steps and that processes? It's got to make you feel really proud that you have history, that you've continued.
That's right. It is very satisfying to do this, and to see the work, and just see a headstone that used to be broken down, trumped on, and now it's up, and history's preserved.
No question about it. And Wadsworth, we learned today, have a very long history in the early 1800s, and we should be proud of that history, and we can learn a lot from history, can't we, Mark?
Yes, we can. That's right. There's a lot of history here.
And we certainly looked at the materials going into those original head markers, and we certainly have improved over the years, and hopefully we will preserve Woodlawn Cemetery for many, many years and love the trees and the atmosphere here. Thanks for viewing Bruce on the Loose, and we'll do interesting shows coming up.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.